Hello there. So what we're going to look at now is how we can create just a simple blueprint for our static object here. Because that's part of this assignment as well, is looking at how we can turn our objects that we've modeled in Maya into game objects. So you may want to use it only as a static mesh, and if you've come this far, you can probably do that. It's just a prop that's in the level. But if we want to do something interesting, like make it interactive, or have it damage the player, or heal the player, or give a prompt to the player, then we need to start using blueprints. So what are blueprints? Well, in object-oriented programming, the idea is that when this object here collides with this object, something should happen. The idea that every object has a set of properties that are inherent, so that when I start duplicating that object around, it has the exact same properties, and I can create these things called classes where I group all those objects together that inherit from each other. So pawns or characters will all inherit from each other, so that I don't have to bring in the basics. So a character here, for example, this third person character, that is a blueprint. It's basically a little container where everything else about that blueprint is contained. So the camera, the mesh, the skeletal mesh, everything is all inside this one blueprint. So we're going to look at just creating a much more simpler blueprint than this one here, which will be quite complicated. And this one is just going to have a simple, you walk up to it and you press E and it disappears. Something similar to what we have here for this sword. So you walk over it, a little prompt comes up saying, do you want this? You press it, it disappears. We could get into the more fancier stuff, like if I hold it in my hand, or if I press F to drop it from my hand and it falls on the ground, and then I can pick it up again. We can get into that later. That's more advanced blueprints. What we're looking at now is just how we can turn this solid sort of object into a more usable blueprint. So let's get started. Right here, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this blueprint. And I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to right click down here and go to blueprint class. Now there's lots of different blueprints, as I just said there before. We're just going to go with the simplest one here, which is actor, and we're going to call this BP underscore chest, or could be suitcase, or whatever it is that your object is named. So I'm going to open it up now. So just to talk a little bit about this, you should see a viewport here that basically shows you everything that's in the blueprint. This construction script, which we won't touch too much because this is all about preparing things before it comes into the world. And then there is this event graph here, and this is where all of the functions happen with all of these components. So when you're looking at a blueprint or any kind of scripting, really, you can kind of look at it like a recipe, where we have all of our ingredients here. We have a bit of our prep work, like cracking eggs, melting butter, just sort of disassembling things and reassembling them. And then the event script here is kind of like a step-by-step guide on how do you actually cook this meal. And as soon as we go compile, it cooks it all together. And then when we play the game, that's when we get to eat that delicious meal. So let's talk first. What are the ingredients for this meal? Well, the first one is going to be a static mesh, and that static mesh is going to be our chest. So I'm going to name this one chest. I'm going to go back to my viewport here, and I can see there's nothing there yet because I haven't yet specified out of all of the static meshes in our content browser which one is going to be the one we're using. Mine's named chest, so I'm going to click it there, and there it is. Now we already know it's a bit too small from last time, so I could start by trying to make it just a little bit bigger. But the problem with doing that in here is I have no real reference to anything. So what I can do is I can actually drag and drop this new blueprint into the world. Because as you can see, before it was nothing, and now it's got a chest in there. And what's good about that is I can now change it in here, and as you see, it changes it there as well. And what's good about using this sort of class object-oriented programming is if I change this one here, it changes all of them. So if I'm going around and I'm trying to fix a bug, and I know that my chest is has got a bug in it, I can just do it in this one blueprint here, and it will affect everything else, which is great. Makes it a lot easier to fix bugs. So what we have here now is a chest, but we need a few more ingredients. For this to be an interactive object, we first need to know, is my player close enough to even interact with it? So to do that, what we're going to do is set up a box collision, and we're going to click on it here. I accidentally named it W, so we'll just call that box again. And with that selected, I'm just going to move that up here and make that a little bit bigger there, just so that our character has every chance of interacting with it. So with that in place there, I'm going to go compile, and we're done now pretty much with the ingredients. Just as a test though, I'm always just going to put in a point light. And that point light is just going to basically turn on when our character gets close, so that we know that the player has in fact actually come close enough. It's a very quick and easy way of just debugging things there. There are other ways and I'll show you them, but that's always my favorite. So we'll go here to event graph, we'll delete that. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up an event. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, how do I know all of these things and everything that's there? Well, this is where you have to follow your nose a bit. If you actually click on this box here, so this component, and we go over here to details and we scroll down the bottom, we can actually see all of the events that we can actually set. So we can set it when something hits this chest. We can set it when it's clicked on if we've got that kind of control set up. We can do all of these things here if we want to. So it's not so much about remembering as it is about looking and finding. So here, for example, on begin overlap, that's the one we're going to use. So basically, as soon as a character comes into this, a thing is going to happen. So if you've ever heard of scripted events in games, this is what they mean. It's basically a script that is attached to an event. So, bit of breakdown of what we've just created here. This is an event node because it's red, so there's nothing that comes into here, it's all out, it starts from here. This is what's known as the executive line. Executive line connects all of the functions together, and these down here are what's known as output pips. That's basically data that's coming out that's looking to feed into an input node. So if I left click and drag out here, I'm going to introduce you to the next function, which when you first start this is going to pretty much be the bread and butter. It's not the best way of doing things, but it is the easiest to start getting your head around. And that's called cast to. Using this function, I can cast to any other blueprint object, anything, which is fantastic. It's very flexible and very easy for newcomers. So if I just type in there cast to, and if you remember our character was called third person character, that's it right here. So that is our third person character, our mannequin, if you will. And basically, I can now pull out any information that is attached to this character as well. So if I go back here, that means that I can pull out this and pretty much pull out any data that's there. But first, to finish off this, we're just going to plug in other actor here into object here, just to say that yes, we're recognizing this as an object that has triggered this event. So we're going to go here to compile. And now we're going to do a thing. Now I can change not only everything about this third person character, I can even change all my properties here. And that's what we're going to start by doing. So I'm going to go here to point light and bring this down here. And I'm going to go up here and say set intensity. Now you might be asking, okay, but how do you know that that's a thing? Well, if I click here on point light and I go to any of these properties, these are any of the properties that I wanted to change. So intensity in this case, I'm going to switch to 5000 because I know that that's how bright it is when I was looking at it in here. So now if I turn that to 0, essentially when my character walks in here, that light will turn on and I'll know it's working. So I just need to make sure that these are plugged in, because if it's not plugged in, it won't work. And I'm just going to go here to compile. And then I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to save, and then I'm going to press play, and I'm going to walk up to this chest, and there you go, light goes on. Excellent. So that is a very first simple test. But as you noticed, as I walked away, the light stayed on. So in a minute, we're going to look at how do we get it so the light turns off when we walk away. Might as well do that now. So if I go here back to box, you'll see I can't call another event here after I've already called it. But I can call this other event here, which is called onComponent and overlap. So essentially, same thing. I'm just going to copy this, in fact. So cast to third person character, plug in other object, except this time I'm going to set intensity to 0. and I'm just going to plug that into here because that's the target it's looking for, and I can use that again because it's a component that's part of here. And there we go. I'm going to go minimize here, press play, and walk up to it, and then as I walk away, it switches off. So that is a very simple blueprint that we have set up for here. We're going to make it just quickly as well so that it disappears, just so it can act like a pickup. More advanced users, I would recommend looking at the playlist in our YouTube series for blueprints that will go through all of this and a little bit more, including HUDs and UIs and widgets and everything. And that's how I got this thing here, where you could have a pickup E, have it identify that object and have it disappear. We're just going to do a simpler version of that, which is going to be you collide with it, press E, and it disappears without the widget. So we go back here, and we're going to, instead of having this here, we're going to, actually I'll leave those on there because they're cool. And I'll just instead go here to enable input. So what enable input does is it means that when I get close to something, I can actually start pressing keys and have things happen inside this blueprint here that allow me to do it. I could always just go inside the third person character and have it there, but you can also have it here as well. So it's asking for a player controller. I'm going to just type in there player controller, and that's just basically when your character spawns in, it has a controller that says, right, when you press WASD, I'll move in all those directions. And I'm going to have a disable input here as well. The reason I'm having that is that when we walk away from it, we don't want to be able to interact with it. We only want to be able to interact with it when we are close to it. So now that that's set up, we can pretty much set up any key to do anything we want to any of these properties. So I'm just going to select the E key, and the E key for some reason never comes up like this, but I can pick any of these keys here and then just change them here. So no. The E key is notoriously hard to select. So anyway, with that pressed, I can then make it so that it disappears. So I will just left click out here and say destroy actor. Simple as that. So when I walk up to it now, light will go on, and if I press E, boom, it's gone. And that's generally what happens when we have these things here. It's a bit of trickery. It doesn't go into our inventory, it just disappears off the scene, and then the inventory says, oh yes, you have one of these. So now, when you press F to spawn it, I will spawn a completely different sword, but one that is still in your hand and follows along. And then if I press F again to drop it, I'm going to destroy the one that's in your hand and create another one that sits on the floor. And then when this light goes on, I'm now going to allow you to pick up that sword after a certain amount of seconds. Because obviously, if I allowed you to do that straight away, you could pick up the sword before it hits the ground. But by giving it a couple of seconds, it gives it a second to fall on the ground and then do that. So we'll have a look at a bit more of that a little bit later, because we won't have to do that here for our third assessment here for the storage container. All we needed to know was how to get an object into Maya, set up collision and physics and materials, and then just as a bonus, we have looked at our very first blueprint. So that's all we'll be looking at today, and later on we'll have a look at this sword part, and we'll talk a little bit about inventory systems as well. So thank you for joining us, and I hope all goes well with your storage container. If not, come and ask me and Toby, and we will do our best to help you. See you later.